Today's presenters will be Gus Cicala, President and CEO of Project Assistance, and Jim Colton, Practice Director of Portfolio and Project Management. I'd like to introduce our first speaker now. Gus Cicala founded Project Assistance in 1996 to help companies achieve better, faster, more cost-effective project-based results. Gus is a recognized portfolio and project management expert who has published many popular articles and books on the subject and is frequently asked to present and teach topics of interest. Gus?
Thank you, Daniel. And my role will be brief at the moment. Jim and I have decided to switch roles today. So Jim's going to do the best practices portion of this, and I'm going to do the Microsoft project demo. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the agenda and pass it over to my colleague, Jim Colton. So we're going to talk about common challenges in the best practices of planning, and then talk about really cut this up into two pieces. One is building a schedule, best practices in a demonstration, how we get dates into a plan, how we build a work breakdown structure, how we link tasks, how we see a critical path. Jim's going to cover the best practices, and I'll do a demo, and then we'll go back to Jim for best practices for how to add resources, level, baseline the plan, and go to some practices and demonstration. And then we'll talk about some best practices for changing your organization's planning process, wrap up, and a couple parting gifts at the end. When we get through the questions, we'll also give a slide with some additional information, a free chapter from my book, etc. So with no further ado, I'd like to pass this over to my colleague, Jim Colton, who manages our consulting delivery organization. Jim?
Thank you, Gus, and welcome everyone. Appreciate your attendance today, and hopefully you'll have a few takeaways from today's session. I'm going to start by just discussing some common business challenges that we see confronting a lot of our clients. First off, in terms of project planning, a critical step in project management, of course, is getting off to a good start, knowing exactly where you'd like to go and what your final destination is. Without a good start on a project, the odds of being successful will drop dramatically. So building that foundation to enable business decisions. So as executives look at project plans and the progress of projects against the plan, they need to make critical business decisions at certain stage gates throughout the life cycle. So executives want to make sure the progress of the plan is as scheduled, on cost, on quality, on good budget. And if you're going off course, you know, some key decisions might need to get made in terms of redirecting resources, extending the schedule, or potentially halting this project altogether. So as project managers, we're accountable for presenting the accurate and timely information to executives so they can make those key decisions. I think one key area that more and more organizations are confronting today is how do we manage our workforce to ensure that we're delivering projects by applying the right resources at the right time. And as you can imagine, the enterprise view of portfolio management and resource management is extremely dependent on each individual project schedule. So it's really critical for these schedules to be tight and to be very pragmatic and accurate in order to enable the bigger picture of enterprise resource management. In my experience, project management is essentially about setting expectations with stakeholders and meeting those expectations, meeting or exceeding. And having a good schedule that's accurate and a plan that's manageable is a critical step in setting those expectations and then delivering as promised. I think it was Edward Deming that said, you can't manage what you don't measure. So as project managers, it's on us to set the project plan in motion, make sure it's stable, it's pragmatic, and then set that baseline against, that we can measure progress against, both in terms of schedule and cost. In terms of technical challenges that we see, most of us can deliver a pretty looking Gantt chart with some nice colors and timelines. Today we're going to talk about getting beyond the Gantt chart. How do we be more proactive to make sure that we keep projects on track? And what are some of those techniques? We'll share some of those today. Understanding the MS project scheduling engine. Wow. I've seen quite a few very experienced project managers that really don't understand the mechanics of how this tool works. So we're going to get into a little bit of that today in terms of, when I make a change in effort or duration or resource availability, how does that actually impact the project schedule? How do we balance resource demand versus supply? Gus is going to share today some techniques for resource leveling and taking some vantage points in terms of looking at overall demand versus overall supply, and what level of granularity should you go in terms of tracking and managing resources. I've worked in MS Project for many years, and I'm still learning tricks and techniques in terms of how to get the available information that I need to make key decisions and to manage my project. So we're going to talk through, how to use views, how to apply tables, and utilize filters so you're seeing, the information that you need and only the information you need. Some project plans can be very unmanageable without applying these techniques. Finally, in terms of challenges, I mentioned earlier challenges with resource capacity versus demand. So it's important, again, to keep the schedules current in terms of managing the task, understanding resource percentage utilization, adjusting resources to meet demands and stay on the critical path. And many organizations struggle with what level of granularity do I go to in managing resources? Do I stay at the role level? Do I get to the individual level? We'll talk briefly about some of the pros and cons and the challenges in trying to get there. In terms of scheduling estimates, challenges there. We've found over the years it's really defining a consistent and repeatable approach and leveraging prior work that's going to help you be more accurate with your schedule estimates. And it'll give you more confidence as a project manager to commit to your baseline. If you have a tried and true approach, an estimating model that's proven to be reliable, you're going to be more confident in setting that stake in the ground with your key stakeholders. Finally, in terms of cost estimating, once again, having a reliable, consistent, repeatable approach in terms of developing those estimates, working with your project teams to really understand the work that's ahead of you and providing accurate and detailed estimates. This will provide the foundation for a good plan. So we're going to start just to engage you folks a little bit here with a poll. The first poll is around, what is your biggest challenge with building a schedule in project? So we're going to give you a few seconds here to answer the question. Is your challenge linking the task and assigning constraints, critical path analysis, assigning the resources to your project, leveling resources, or understanding baselining, what that's all about? So let the results here roll in. It's interesting. The majority actually are citing leveling resources. Not surprising based on what I've seen in terms of my experience as a consultant. Number two, understanding baselining. And linking tasks, number three. So I'm going to close that poll. gives you a little bit of insight into kind of maybe where we'll spend a little more time today, leveling resources. Next up, we're going to talk through the project scheduling process. Step number one, really, what is the primary goal of the project? What's the main product or the outcome of this project? What am I trying to deliver? It's amazing how often I see that the stakeholders or sponsors of a project really don't have a firm understanding of what they expect at the end of the day. So we feel it's really a key step in terms of identifying in as much detail as possible what is the exact outcome, what tangible work products will you deliver. That's step number one. What are the sub-goals, intermediate steps? So if I'm building a house, I might say, I want to build a house on the river, but how many bedrooms do you want? How many bathrooms? Do you want a patio, or would you like a deck? What's the landscaping going to look like? How am I going to paint the house? What color? So ideally, we identify as many of those details as possible before we really launch the project formally. What are the key activities? So we want to build a deck instead of a patio. What are the key activities? How do I actually build that deck? What are the subcomponents in terms of the tasks and subtasks that are necessary to achieve that goal? And finally, what order do the activities have to be done? In most projects, there's certain dependencies. I can't do step 2 until I complete step A or step 1. And it's important from a critical path perspective and a project planning perspective to really understand the dependencies amongst these activities. So how do I actually arrange my schedule? How do I get it set up? Well, the foundation of the project schedule, we talk about a work breakdown structure. And depending on what type of project you're undertaking, we talk about this project lifecycle. And we'll show some examples in a few minutes, but the project lifecycle is really driving the creation of the project product. And typically around the project lifecycle, we wrap some project management to make sure that we're tracking as scheduled and we're able to control the overall project. So what are some examples of lifecycle? Well, you can look at it from a industry perspective. Here's some examples. So consumer products. I want to manufacture and build a consumer product. There's a life cycle, right, to do that. Step A, step B, step C, step D. Software development life cycle. For those that, maybe you work in an IT organization, you've got your typical planning, requirements, design, development, and implement. Life cycle probably very similar to that. And so on. Here's some other examples. So the work breakdown structure will essentially be built around these product life cycles. And then again, we'll wrap some project management activities around this. All right, just a few key techniques that I think are really important when you're building a plan. I mentioned earlier task dependencies. In Microsoft Project, there's a few variations of those. Here we're showing a straight dependency with 0 lead or 0 lag, meaning that I could start task 2 when task 1 is complete. This is probably the most common type of dependency that you utilize in MS Project. If I have an activity or task that I'm concerned that I may not complete, I want to add a little bit of buffer because I'm concerned about not completing on time. In those cases, a great technique to buffer that schedule is to give yourself a lag. So in between task 1 and task 2, we still have the dependency there, but we may have a day or 2 days or 3 days or 10 days, depending on the degree of risk in completing that task. So it allows you to stay on the overall schedule for the project while being late for certain key tasks, because we do have that buffer. If we have a task that we feel very confident that we can complete on time, or maybe finish early, we can use task with leads. So I still have a finish to start dependency, but I'm overlapping tasks. I'm starting task 2 even prior to completing task 1. And often this technique can be used when you're trying to crash a project that may be behind schedule. We're going to share, looking at the critical path. There's the definition. I assume most of you are familiar with it. But managing the critical path is so important. Not only managing the critical path, but managing the near critical path. So to break it down simply, the critical path is essentially saying that any task that finishes late that's on the critical path will cause the entire project to be late. So it's most important that as a project manager, we spend the bulk of our time looking at the critical path or the near critical path activities. Because there's items that are not on the critical path that can run late, can stray a bit, and overall will still be on track for the overall project. So if you guessed which one was the critical path, path right through the middle was 12 days compared to some of the others. So the longest route through the project was the middle path. We call that the critical one. So let's jump to our poll number 2. Does your organization use the critical path to evaluate schedule risk? So I'm going to launch this one and give you a few seconds to answer. Guys, we're running neck and neck right now, right about 50-50.
Not what I expected.
What did you expect, Gus?
I expected, we see a lot of organizations that aren't using critical path. There's a lot of project managers that wish their management would use critical path. I don't know, what's your perspective, Jim?
I would say it's extremely risky to not really understand the critical path for a project. And right now we're running at 54%. I'm going to close the poll that actually don't use the critical path to evaluate schedule risk.
So I was slightly right.
All right. So that's going to bring us to our initial demo. We're going to have a couple segments of the demo, and I'm going to hand it off to Gus at this moment.
Thanks, Jim. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into Microsoft Project. So I have a plan that should come up on your screen in just a second. And we have basically built a plan that has a critical path, has multiple paths. And so what I want to do is just talk about a couple real fundamental things. As a matter of fact, I'm going to start with a brand new project plan and show a couple of the faults that happen when we start a plan from scratch. And the first thing we see is a start and finish date in 0 days of duration. If I say phase 1, project automatically puts that underneath this 0 task. Some folks don't even know how to get the 0 task there, so I'll talk about that for a minute. But the task also starts today. So you might ask the question, why does it start today? Are we okay with that? If you're in a really bad spot, you might be doing something like prepare the plan, and maybe that was supposed to happen next week or last week. Let's make it worse. Okay, this happens in real life sometimes, and what it does is it says I can't move it before start date. So you might ask the question, how does this project start date thing happen? So my point of saying that is it's common to open project and start building a work breakdown structure. And I'm going to suggest as a best practice we not do that. Jim talked about definition. How do we define a project? And in Microsoft Project, we don't load a charter necessarily. I mean, we could if we had Project Server and, we're putting documents into SharePoint. But just straight up in the scheduling engine, if I go to the Project tab, okay, so we have Task, Resource, Report, Project. One of the first major buttons we see here is called Project Information. Okay, what we see is the start date defaults to today. Okay? Actually, as a matter of fact, you might ask, why does it default to today? Let's try something else. If I go to File and Options, there are a number of options out here. For example, what the date format is. For example, why does it open in the Gantt chart? Because maybe you didn't know you asked it to open in the Gantt chart, but it does. Okay, so I've had people say to me, we don't like, our management uses this a lot. They don't want to see the Gantt chart. They just want to see a list of tasks. Well, that's called the task sheet. Right, so if I choose the task sheet and I say, okay, basically, next time I open it, I'll see the Gantt chart without the Gantt chart, essentially. It'll just be the left-hand side. Okay, let's go back into Options. So I'm going to go back to the Gantt chart with the timeline. This is alphabetic. All right, if I go to the schedule, we can see weeks start on a Sunday. I'm not fond of that. My week starts on a Monday. I'm not sure how we got this Sunday thing, but that's obviously a tradition. There's a default task type, which I'll get back to, that I'm not fond of as a task type. We'll talk about that in the next demonstration about resourcing. But this one here, look. All tasks are scheduled to start on the project start date. Okay. Well, I can change that to the current date. So if it's December, 4 months from now, and I'm adding tasks, I may want it to drop today's date in there, for example. Okay. But the main point here is when I look at project information under the project ribbon, there's another temptation, schedule from project start date. Well, gee, I'm always given a project where I'm asked to have a deadline. And you can see here the finish date is calculated. So it's tempting to say, hey, why don't we just go ahead and set the finish date? And let's go ahead and say, hey, everybody's got a finish date of December 31st, right? And now we see that the start date is calculated, and that can be problematic. And the other thing that can be problematic is all tasks begin as late as possible. Okay, so that can be a little tricky. That's called a default constraint. I'll talk about that a little bit when I get to lag and lead. So we recommend starting from the start date. You can see you can set the current date. That has different effects on the scheduling engine. That's something you can set. A status date is also something we can use. We'll be introducing our next webinar around project control and execution at the top of this hour, and that's more about statusing, right? So let's not worry about that. The calendar, I could have the project assistant's holiday calendar or the U.S. holiday calendar, and if I have an office in Europe, maybe I have the UK calendar or the German calendar. Okay, so these are all things we want to be aware of to the point where, I also have this thing called change working time, but we can see there's something called the standard calendar. So we do not suggest using the default, because here's what the default is. How many people are working on September 7th? I'm not going to put a poll up there. I'm going to guess that most of you are going to be celebrating Labor Day on September 7th. You can see project has defaulted this as a productive work day. Be careful. If you schedule 40 hours this week, project's going to let that work be committed for that week. And I can show several other examples around, for example, Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Day, 4th of July, on and on and on. Okay, so we strongly recommend that we get to, as a matter of fact, I'd like to ask this question, what's 5 times 8 times 52? And most people know that to be, especially project managers, 2,080. Okay, so what we have is a default productive resource capability, because this is your inventory. When we get to resource management, this is your inventory of available breathing widgets. Okay, it's your warehouse. So you're saying your capacity of your resources, when we get to balancing demand versus capacity, is going to come from the calendar. Okay, so there's a lot we can do on that. I'm sort of out of time on the definition piece, so let me get to a little bit of planning. So phase 1, prepare the plan. If prepare the plan as part of phase 1, on the task tab, I'm going to click the indent button, and prepare the plan is going to be part of that. Okay? Review the plan. Present the plan. Phase 2. Now notice it doesn't note outdent there. I'm going to say plan for design, or schedule design, or whatever you want to call it. So what I'm going to do with phase 2 is I'm going to do something called an outdent. Okay? And now I have 2 phases. I can highlight these 3 tasks if I wish, and click the link button, and they'll all get linked at the same time. Okay? I can click on number 5 and hit the insert button if I want, and that'll insert a new task. I'm going to share with management. Okay, now management asked me if they can have it before the presentation's over. So, well, before it's over. So let's put some durations on here. Let's say they're 2, 3, 1, and 2, just to get some different look here. If I double click on this link here, I can say, overlap this. They said they wanted to see a preview. So I put a negative lag, that's known as lead, and we see there's an overlap between those 2 tasks. Okay? Jim mentioned in the best practices, that's a sort of introduces risk. We call it trashing the schedule, right? Somebody says squeeze the schedule. We say, okay, well, I'm sharing the plan with management, but we haven't presented and got approval yet. Is that ever? Yes. Does it ever happen that development starts when design's not finished yet? We have a question from somebody in the console about Agile. You know, yeah, we have design and development running concurrently? Absolutely. Right? So this is design phase, and this is this is design phase, and this is like scrums and sprints. What I might do is I'm going to highlight using the control key, linking these 2 tasks. Okay? Maybe this is a long task. Maybe this says run scrums. We keep this real simple here, right? I might link these 2 things. I'm planning for the design, or I might say finalizing design, I'm going to overlap these things. Very, very common thing to do. Now, that's way overlap. Let me give one less day on this. These would be big numbers, right? These would be 30 days, 25 days, 2-week sprints, whatever they happen to be. Okay, the other thing we can do is introduce some risk buffers. I'll put 2 days of lag on here. I recommend doing this, okay, especially when you zoom out. Okay, if I zoom out my schedule, and by the way, there's a little zoom out slider here, okay, that gets harder and harder to find. And do we want it to be hard to find? Yeah, usually. I'm not putting buffers in there to take criminal money out of the project. I'm putting it in there so that people don't use the time that we have in the buffer we have in the plan. Working spans to fill the time available for its completion, right, is what Fred Brooks said in the Mythical Man Month. So these are just some real basic things about, to lead to a schedule. Because what's happening here is project is setting the schedule. You can see these dates are being automatically calculated. Okay? So again, if I go back to project, information, I can see all tasks begin as soon as possible. Well, what's as soon as possible? The first day of the project, unless it has a predecessor. Gee, what would happen if I'm going to go ahead and zoom in a little bit. What would happen if I, for example, said, well, this thing is saying start on the 2nd, and I'm going to say, let's start it on the 3rd. I'm going to get a warning. Project's going to start talking me out of it. Move the task and remove the link. No, I still want the link. I'm just asking them to start a day later. So move the task and keep the link, or don't do anything. So I'm going to go ahead and keep the link and watch what happens. It moved it, it put it out to the 3rd, and now you're looking at this link saying, well, wait a minute, why is it the 3rd? There's only 2 days of lag. And if we wave our mouse over this little column here, the indicator column, which, by the way, is not in every view, this task has a start no earlier than constraint. Start no earlier than constraint, as you can see really close on that little thing, it's a blue dot. It's a soft constraint. A hard constraint, let me double click. Go to advanced. I'm going to say start no later than. I'm going to say it must start on the 3rd. Now it's really going to try to talk me out of it. Just cancel right out. First thing it says is just don't even do it. Okay? Continue but avoid the conflict. Avoid conflict. Gee, that's something that sounds like I should be doing. I should avoid conflict, right, everybody? And so start no later than, put a soft constraint, or no. Keep the conviction. But look at the message up here. You set a must start on constraint. This could result in a scheduling conflict either now or later because this task has at least one of those tasks linked to it. So I recommend this, and I'm not going to show it right now. I'm going to go right to the critical path and send it back to Jim. I recommend, if you're going to use a hard constraint, either something that can't move, and oh, by the way, what if I had one down here that said target, finish, date of project? Now I can't tell project here that I've got to finish on December 31st because it's gray, it's calculated. But what I can do is I can go here and I can put in a hard constraint of, as a matter of fact, in this case, I would say finish no later than, so it can move forward. Yes, we're allowed to finish sooner, but we're not allowed to finish any later than, in this case, let's just say it's September 30th. It's a short project. Okay? So in this case, it hasn't moved yet. It can start earlier, but now when I link it, it moves out. That's cool. Okay, but let's say the predecessor goes 3 days, no problem. 4 days, no problem. 10 days, no problem. Right? 10 to the slash doesn't work. Okay, 10 days, no problem. 15 days, uh-oh, we've got a problem. And what's happened is I've just done something on the critical path. The running of the scrums has run over, and therefore, look what it says. This action will cause a scheduling conflict. Task 8, which is run scrums, has a task constraint or is linked to a task that cannot move. And I love that little picture, like a little fender bender there, right? You got a crinkled arrow. It's trying to move, but it's not allowed to move. What's it telling you? We've got a problem. In this case, I would actually cancel and see what's going on. Okay. In this case, we can go out there and say, you know, what's that constrained task? We can see it. We can now sense and be told there's a problem. Okay? So the last thing I'm going to show you before I send it back to Jim is this this overall critical path for a real plan, right? If I right mouse click, I like doing this out here in where my view is. If I right mouse click, I get a menu of views, and this is called the network diagram. Okay? And usually it'll come in something like this. Okay, it's kind of like, you see my slider here down at the bottom right? Usually it's going to look something like this. So what I suggest, obviously, is we zoom out. And all those little dotted lines you see are pages. So if you send this to the printer on a very simple critical path, you're going to print a lot of paper. Okay? So this is my critical path. Now, some things we can look at. One final thing I'll show you from the Gantt chart. The definition of critical, by the way, by options. If I go to advanced and I go to the very bottom, it says tasks are critical if slack is less than or equal to 0 days. Jim mentioned nearly critical tasks. We had an 11-day path and a 12-day path. Well, those 11-day tasks are almost critical. Okay, let's cast a wider net over the definition of critical. I'm going to leave it for 0 for now, and I'm going to apply something called the schedule table. If I right mouse click right above this column here, I can ask for the schedule table, and the schedule shows me the total slack, the free slack, the late start, the late finish. How late can it start before it impacts the plan? What's the free slack before it affects its next independent path? Okay, we see here everything that's 0 has red on it, and oh, by the way, if I click format, it's because we've checked this thing called critical task. Automatically colors my blue Gantt charts to red. And I could go on for hours, but I don't have hours, so Jim, back to you for part 2.
All right. Let's do it.
You want me to send control to you?
Please do.
I shall.
So in terms of carrying on with the scheduling, we call it part 2. Now that you've set up your work breakdown structure, you've identified your key tasks, you've identified dependencies, and you understand the critical path. What's next? So what skills do I need? important part of planning, right? I know what task I need to do, but do I actually have the right skills? Are they available? Who's going to do the work? A big step. And depending on your ability as an organization to manage supply and demand, this task can be somewhat daunting. You may have to talk to other project managers. You may have to talk to your manager. What are the priorities here? Which project takes precedence when we have a conflict? Those types of questions need to get answered. How big are the tasks? So our best practice here is have the person doing the task estimated, right? And based on your experience, you can ask the right questions to make sure that person is giving you a practical, realistic estimate. And obviously, if they have more experience on their job, the estimates should be more accurate as they gain that knowledge. When will the work be done? What does the schedule look like? So if I give a difficult task to a novice resource, I might have to extend the schedule. If I give a difficult task to an experienced resource, maybe I can pull that task in. So the task timeline may be adjusted based on who's doing the work. Who is actually going to do the work? So when I go through the planning process, I may apply a generic resource. So I may say that I'm going to use a business analyst or a marketing person for a specific task. But when I actually get, when it's time to perform the work, I certainly need to assign a real resource to that task. How do we ensure that the resources are available? And hopefully, if you don't have an automated way to do that today, that your organization is working toward that. In many cases today, this is a manual process. It's email, it's a phone call. I need Tom Smith next Friday through the following Thursday. Is he available? And that's how many organizations operate today. We're suggesting, try to move to the next level in terms of your maturity. Will make life a lot easier. And then finally, how do we put a stake in the ground so we can measure that progress? And we do that in MS Project through the concept of baseline. How does a baseline work? Well, before you baseline, you simply have the schedule. You know what your work is. You may know your cost, your start, finish date, your duration, etc. The baseline field will be empty. Once I apply a baseline, then that field will be populated, and the baseline data will remain the same until you re-baseline. So you'll have that static view, that snapshot, if you will, of what the project plan looked like at the time you completed the plan and you baselined it. And then as the plan is changed, you can reflect back on that baseline and see, which task took longer than expected, which task maybe you finished early. And you can learn a lot from that for estimating on your next similar project. Another key in terms of managing the schedule as you go through it here as you're planning, understanding this formula, and again, a lot of project managers are not familiar with how MS Project works. And this is the magic behind the schedule, is the duration, the length of time it takes to complete the task is equal to the work or the effort, in many cases we call that effort, divided by the units. Units meaning the percent of time that the resource is available to complete the task, to work on it. So let's put those into examples just to further understand it. Example 1, how long will it take to complete the task? The work effort is 40 hours. My resource is available 50% of the time. I take 40 divided by 0.5, and it's a 2-week duration, or an 80-hour duration. One other example to reinforce. I have to complete a task within 4 weeks. The work effort is 120 hours. What percentage of time do I need from my resource? So this is common algebra. If you remember back in high school, college, whenever you took the course. Again, I'm going to apply the formula. Work equals duration divided by units. My duration is 160. My work is 120. And my resource, then, I need 75% of the time. They have to be available 3/4 of the time to work on this task, or it won't get done as scheduled.
That applies to how that work is scheduled by day, right, Jim? If we took 75% and we looked at the daily usage scale, what would we see? Right, so we see the 6 hours, right? 75% of an 8-hour day.
Exactly. If assuming we have an 8-hour day set up in the
great point, right?
In the default, right?
Yeah. Well, it goes right to the calendar, right? If you're out a half a day, it's going to take 3/4 of a half a day and schedule you for 3 hours, right?
And some organizations, their folks, maybe they're only available a 7-hour day or 7.5-hour day. So you should make that adjustment as the default. All that is critical as you schedule your plan. All right, pull number 3. Are you asked to use MS Project to provide accurate estimates of resource demand? If you wouldn't mind, please take a shot at an answer here. We'll gather up the results, and then we're going to move into the second half of our demo. About 2/3 majority, we're saying, answered no. So, what's your perspective on that, Gus? What's the impact if you really don't understand the resource demand?
You just go read the question and answers and wrap it up, I guess. No, I mean, it's, my perspective is, I learned a long time ago when I was at IBM Professional Services, and I hate to say how long ago it was, but it's when professional services wasn't a word at IBM. They talked about an optimized plan is everything that is known goes into a plan that works. And my perspective is you don't know if it works just by throwing dates in there, right? The only way you really know is if people are available, right? So that's a challenge. It's a big challenge. And maybe you try to do it some other place, I don't know, but I view it as a huge challenge.
All right, I'm going to pass the baton once again to Gus. We're going to get into the second phase of the demo.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
You got it.
And this will be pretty brief because we're going to leave a little bit of time for Jim to talk about one more methodology for changing the planning process. And so, one of the things that's interesting is, and it's gotten better in terms of the number of people that can answer this question, but I find it interesting when we ask people, do you know how to see the work that's assigned to a resource, especially if we're interviewing somebody, to be in our Microsoft project practice. They might say something like, well, you can double click on it. And I'll say, well, yeah, you can't see the resource tab, but it doesn't show work. Or they might say something like, you can click on assigned resources. Well, yeah, you can do that, but it doesn't show the work. Okay? Or they can say, well, it's out in the Gantt chart. And I say, well, yeah, you can do that, but it doesn't show the work. And the answers start to get pretty slim. Now, you could say something, for example, task usage. And in this case, task usage shows you the task and the resource. And if you know how to click a simple button on the task tab called scroll to task, yes, it will show you the work. But what if you wanted to see a summary and the units? Right? So if I go back to my Gantt chart, the answer is, well, the trick is you can see my mouse getting a bidirectional arrow on the base of the right-hand vertical scroll bar, but that's not the easiest way to do it. Just click details. If I click details, usually this is a different default. If I right mouse click, I'll see something usually called something like resources and predecessors. So on the left-hand side, we see information about this task as it relates to the work and how it's spread out, in this case 100%, which means we would expect to see, well, gee, what would happen if I put task usage up top? Yeah, how about that? 100%. In this case, why is that starting with 4 hours? Well, maybe the predecessor ended at noon, and now I'm going to be assigned at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So there's a lot of information about how project allocates resources. So we want to be aware of a couple of things. You see I'm showing the task details form. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that and just show something called task details. Actually, I'll just leave it like this. This is fine because we're running out of time. You see this is called fixed units. Well, gee, what does that mean? If I increase my duration, what happens to my work? Oh, it doubled it to 80 hours. I don't like that. I just got all these estimates from my team, and they all said it's committed to 40 hours, and we gave them more time to get it done, and project doubled the work. So if I undo that and say, gee, what would happen if I say, keep my work fixed, and I say, 10 days. Any guesses? Hold my work constant, spread it out over 10 days. 4-hour days. Of course, the first day is a half day. That's kind of interesting. It took 50% of a half day. You're only available in the afternoon, so it took the half days. Okay, so that's kind of how it works. Now, the concern I have is, what about this thing called resource leveling? If I go to my Gantt chart, I can't tell necessarily if people are over-allocated. By the way, the indicator column went away because I applied the schedule table. So you might say, well, gee, what happened to all that nice little ratting me out that everybody's over-allocated? Okay, well, that's a hint. But why did I let this happen? Or how bad is it? Or who's the most over-allocated? So my suggestion is go to resource usage. I'm going to collapse all my assignments because that's what usage shows. It shows the person and their assignments. So I'm going to choose select all and choose view, outline, hide all subtasks. And now I have just the resource. I'm going to go back to my task scroll bar, scroll to task. I'm going to choose view. Now this is a little tricky, right? I'm bouncing all over the place. I'm going to choose months. I'm going to see very quickly, is this plan feasible? Who would I rather not be? I wouldn't want to be Steve in April, right? I mean, what, there's
Easter.
Yeah. It's going to be a rough April, right? And so we've got some problems here, right? And now I can drill down and see what those problems are. But here's what I prefer. There's a well-hidden view in project that you might not even be aware of. And if I go to more views, again, what am I doing? I'm right mouse clicking on the name of the views, and I go to more views, and there's this thing called resource allocation. And it's not even in the menu. Okay, so you have to know to apply this. Or what I could do is I could even edit the form or the view, more views, resource allocation, edit, and it has resource usage on top and something called the leveling Gantt on the bottom. Okay, so what I can do is I can begin to look at leveling the resources. I'm not even that fond of that. It's okay, but what I would rather have is maybe something like task usage on top and resource usage on bottom. And now, when I click on a task, not a phase, I can see if Jeffrey is not available. And maybe I don't care about a daily scale. Maybe I care about a weekly scale. Is Jeffrey okay by the week? No, he's not. He's got 64 hours here. Stop giving him work. Okay? I call this task leveling because the concept is while you're on the task, get these people level. Let's see what Jeffrey has to do. Let's see what Steve has to do. Steve's got a problem here. Okay? So we can see as we're assigning resources if there's a problem. If you wait till the end, yes, you can do something like go to the Gantt chart and see that people are over-allocated, and go here to resources and go to leveling options and say level now or level all, okay? And we see some options here. Level only within available slack. You turn that off. What's available slack? It means I'm not only putting the task up, too bad, I'm going to move the whole project out if you leave that unchecked. Can adjust individual assignments. Okay, now Jim and I are going to work on different weeks on the same task. Can create splits in remaining work. I started working on it last week. Now I'm going to be told to pick up the work in September. I got a head of steam and I'm going to jam on the brakes for 2 weeks. So be careful about the leveling options, okay? Because what this does is it tells project, create whatever carnage is necessary to make these people level, and that's not always the best idea. The other thing I'd be careful about is automatic leveling. We've done a lot of diagnosis on plans. One of the hardest ones to find is somebody leaves automatic leveling because it keeps changing everything every time you touch your plan. So certainly not recommended. God forbid we get ourselves to a point where I go to resource usage and I've got a nice picture. Okay, I've got an optimized plan. I've got a plan that works. This plan doesn't work. This is not an optimized plan. So let's say we level it and we optimize it. Let's say we do something like level all. Oops, great. My project was ending in April. Now it's ending in August. Okay. And by the way, the red is interesting. They all have less than a full month's worth of work in most cases. So when we see the red now, like for example, Steve has 92 hours. What we're going to see is he's probably over-allocated at a weekly level. If we drill down here, we'll find out too much in like the second week of March, let's say. Okay, so when I'm done, I'm going to ask the question, is the plan baseline? So if I right mouse click on my table thing here, I'm going to go back to Gantt chart. So this is a view, not a table. Sorry about that. I'm going to look at something called the baseline. Doesn't show up in the menu, but if you choose more tables, I can apply the baseline. I can see it's been baseline in 1998. Well, let's see. We've been teaching this course for a long time, apparently. Okay. so what I probably would want to do, if I go to the project tab and I say set baseline, I can say clear the baseline. And if a baseline is clear, this is what it looks like. Jim mentioned this, right? It's uninitiated values in the field. So when I baseline, I can choose to baseline just the phase, maybe just design and requirements, maybe set an interim plan, meaning I'm going to save a baseline because I'm creating a new baseline. Okay, but the most common one is to set the whole baseline. And now what it did was it copied, and I must have chose select. Oh no,
you had selected tab.
Okay, thanks. So let's prove that this works. Set baseline for the entire project. It does say entire project. It's already been baselined. You want to re-baseline everything, and I re-baselined everything. Okay? So in our next webinar, we're going to pick up from a baseline plan and start assigning actuals to the plan from a schedule, cost, and work standpoint. We're going to look at variances, but for now, we've got a lot to get through in 5 minutes, so I'm going to send this back to Jim.
Excellent. Good starting point. I liked it. All right, I'm going to launch the next poll. If you could take a moment here, to what degree does your organization's planning process align with your project management scheduling tool? So are they in sync? Are they, tightly linked, loosely linked, no link at all, no planning process, or no scheduling tool? The positive thing I'm seeing is very low numbers on those last two. So, Gus, what challenges have you seen when these two things aren't tightly linked?
Well, I mean, the biggest challenge we see, we do a lot of project server work, and there's a lot of PMOs that think because their project managers have been using project for 10 years that they can just take their plans off the desktop and publish it to the server, right? And what we find out is there's a lot of work to sort of document the process, the planning process, link it to the tool, and such that when we get stuff out on the server, it's actually meaningful. So the words we use is software becomes shelfware, right? And that's a risk if these things aren't tightly coupled.
Yeah, I think as we all are learning or have learned, managing a project schedule is a lot more work than you might think at first glance. So it takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of value, and organizations that do this well, they just have a much higher success rate. But it takes hard work. Okay, just to wrap up the content, we're going to talk about a project life cycle, product life cycle that we use. We call it vision, implement, and adopt. And this is a life cycle that we use as a consulting organization to help our clients get better at project management. So we use the VIA method as our work breakdown structure, and then we wrap project management around vision, implement, and adopt. So just quickly to walk you through, as a starting point, what we like to do is really understand what our clients are doing today in terms of, let's say the scope is project planning. So what are their techniques? What tools do they use? What are their challenges? What do they do well? And what do they do not so well? And then we look at, where do they want to take their project planning process? How good do they have to be? What's their vision of where they want to get to? Do they want to get to full resource leveling across the enterprise? Do they want to use baselining and critical path analysis? Should they decide to go there, then we present a roadmap to take them from point A to point B. Once we have a roadmap in place, we have a more typical implementation life cycle where you go through your requirements, maybe some process changes, changes to the tools. You may need some education and training around new techniques and new tools. And finally, our final phase is adoption, which we find to be critical. Once we've implemented the new processes and tools, how do we ensure that everyone understands what they're expected to do, and how do we continually improve as an organization around, in this case, project planning? Pull number 5. Throw it out there real quick. Would you like us to contact you? Are you going to need us some help?
If we get a 0, we don't have to show those results, okay, Jim?
No, it's above 0.
Okay, good.
Definitely well above 0. All right, so I'm going to close that one out and move on. It's kind of a wrap up. So, my project assistants, we've been in project management consulting world for about 20 years. I think we just hit the anniversary. Is that right, guys?
Yes, 20th year started on the 14th of August.
So we help our clients in a number of areas, developing that strategic roadmap around improving the organization within, many areas within the PMO. It could be portfolio management, resource capacity management, project planning, project management, depending on your area of need. We provide training and education around many areas of project management, risk management, change, also business analysis. We are a longtime Microsoft partner, and we implement Microsoft Project Server and now the cloud-based Microsoft Project Online. And I'll give Gus some accolades. He's written a very popular book, Microsoft Project 2013, a guide for project managers. It's been out there and it's been very successful, and I think he's starting up his next book, 2016, coming down the road. If you're interested, you're not working or you're looking for a better job, please send us your resume. And parting gifts. We have some gifts for you if you want to come to projectassistance.com/webinar. We offer a chapter from Gus's Project Management Using Microsoft Project 2013 book. There's a promotion code, 50% off the book. We have the downloads, the slide deck, and the recording of today's session. And then numerous videos on how-to around Microsoft Project. Upcoming events. We're going to partner, one of many events we partner with Microsoft. We'll be in Manhattan, date TBA. It's coming up this fall. And we'll be presenting on Microsoft Project in terms of portfolio management, project management training. Gus is going to be in Washington, D.C., September 30th, on a super course, Leadership is Taken, Not Given. And just announcing there our next webinar, October 28th. Avoiding train wrecks. So once we've established a good plan, we have that in place. How do we keep that thing on the rails? How do we keep the project moving forward as planned? Finally, we have a couple minutes here. We're going to stay on for questions and answers.
Yeah, at this time, you're welcome to use the webinar console to submit the questions as we gave you the quick tutorial on earlier. And we've already received a couple of questions. So the first one is a question about leveling on a daily basis. That Microsoft Project is maybe more intuitive for using on a weekly basis, or are you able to use it on a daily basis as well?
Yeah, so there have been improvements. I mean, there's always patches on projects. So we don't recommend leveling on a day-by-day basis, but certainly that function has gotten better. Week by week is more the case, and our recommendation is to try to avoid it at all. You know, if you keep your plan level as you're assigning folks or as changes occur, it's a lot more easier to keep up with things and to make the plan doable. And then we have something about matrix organizations. Yeah. So we have a question about resource demand is managed across a team, and we don't have dedicated resources, so we don't manage their effort. There is a role capability in project. You can put a role out there. You can allow the pool managers to actually name the resources. There is a way to delegate that function in Project Server, at least. And so yeah, that's possible. Something we can show you. If you'd like a follow-up, let us know. Is that it?
Okay, that's it.
We had a lot of people stay on late. Thanks so much for giving us an additional 4 minutes out of your day, in addition to the first 60 minutes you gave to us. Any closing thoughts, Jim? I'm done.
I'm good. Thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it.
Okay, thanks, everybody. Take care.